much, John, and thanks for inviting me to talk to the Labour Representation Committee. Today I'm just really going to talk about my time really working at RMT and working for Bob Crow, and a bit of time just before that as well to give you some context. Just one small correction, I'm actually now a member of Unite rather than RMT, where I work at the International Transport Workers Federation, which is an international confederation of all the transport unions all around the world. So we have unions from Brazil, South Africa, Australia, the Philippines, India, everywhere, basically all affiliated to what is an international transport confederation. But I've spent most of my working life working at RMT, where of course I worked with Bob for quite a long time. So I was just going to talk a bit about that to give people a bit of an idea what it was like to work for and how inspiring he was. So I went to work at the RMT around the time of the merger between the National Union of Railwaymen and the National Union of Seamen in 1990. And at the time, the General Secretary was Jimmy Knapp, who I'm sure one of you will remember. And as a sort of interesting kind of historical Labour Party bit of information aside, I think Jimmy had come to power in 1982, well, this is obviously way before my time, but in 1982 apparently there was a Labour Party conference where Sidney Will, the General Secretary of the NUR as it was then, was caught out casting his union votes in favour of a candidate from the Electricians Union as opposed to the NUM candidate. And he got found out, and basically there was a special conference called of the NUR, and he was forced to stand down. And from that emerged Jimmy Knapp to be the General Secretary. At the time was very much seen as someone from the left coming in to lead the union. And to give you an idea, I suppose some of the challenge that Bob faced when he became General Secretary, in the 1990s, when Jimmy's time, there was a period of great change for the union and massive challenges, because the railways were privatised, of course, in 1994. And up to this point, you know, the railways were an integrated kind of company where you'd have the rail operations, the infrastructure, or the track and the maintenance all together in one company, in BR. However, just before kind of privatisation, the union came under a lot of attacks and faced kind of serious kind of challenges to its leadership. Both British Rail and London Underground ended automatic pay bill deductions. So within a matter of weeks, the union found itself having to try and re-sign tens of thousands of people back into the union through direct debit, also from people paying cash, because at the time there were a lot of low-paid railway workers who weren't used to dealing with bank accounts. So they had to, it was a tremendous challenge for the union at the time. And basically, during that period of the 1990s, leading up to when Bob became General Secretary, the union lost tens of thousands of members because there were mass redundancies as well in the lead up to privatisation of the railways. And I think really at the time, really RMT probably wasn't, not very well equipped to deal with this, but I mean, it's kind of easy saying that, I guess, in hindsight, but when you're under attack, it's very difficult. Jimmy Knapp, the previous leader, was very much a kind of traditional, very much in the traditions of the Labour and Trade Union movement. As a General Secretary, very staunchly loyal to the Labour Party. And I think he hoped, especially after the conference, I think it was in 1995, when Labour said that they were going to, Tony Blair started and said there's going to be a publicly owned railway, that Jimmy and many others felt, excellent, we'll have a Labour government and things will get better. And of course, as we know, because of Tony Blair's staunch kind of refusal to say the word of public ownership and renationalisation, that didn't happen. We had some small changes whereby Railtrack, the for-profit company, was made into a non-for-profit company, Network Rail, and some of the infrastructure and maintenance was brought back under Network Rail. But basically, the the essential split and privatisation of the railway stayed in place. So this, all of a sudden the union was happy to deal with 100 companies rather than just one, and it was a massive challenge. Well, when Bob came in, he very much really revitalised the union in a lot of ways. There had been quite a major restructuring in the 90s in the office, which had got rid of quite a lot of layers of management, which helped, but it was Bob that gave the sense of we can do, and lots of hope and real sort of fighting, sort of commitment to the union. And when one of the first things he did, he wanted to equip branch secretaries who are mainly people that work full time for the different companies we organise with. He gave them a laptop, made sure they were trained very thoroughly to try and sort of equip them for the sort of challenges of trying to represent people in workplaces which were becoming increasingly hostile, and all the old certainties of being able to deal with British Rail and the traditional sort of machinery of the negotiating, the way that all that worked before, that was kind of under threat. Bob was really not at all worried about changing things, even if they'd been done for years and years by successive general secretaries. So, for one example, which I remember, was when he took over, we had an income of something like 6 million through our 60,000 members. And 1 million of that was spent on legal advice and assistance from a company called Patterson Brewer. And Bob just got them in, and he obviously did some shopping around and spoke to some people and realised that we were being way overcharged, so we didn't need to spend that sort of money. And our legal fees were halved in the space of a few weeks. So he was a person that was kind of very much can-do, and he was determined to get the best possible deal he could for RMT members. So he came in 2002, he got re-elected unopposed, and that really does show you kind of his power in the union and his stature. During his time, union membership went up from 57,000 or so when he came in 2002 to when he died, about 80,000 people, 80,000 members. A lot of recruitment on the infrastructure side of the railways and maintenance and renewals, and a number of other companies as well, where we strengthened our position a lot, and consequently were able to take on companies and win better pay deals for members. My job was very much looking at pay statistics, doing pay submissions for some of our organisers and for some of the head office officials who, when they were going to negotiations with companies, so we could argue for the best possible pay rise. I did submissions to Transport Select Committees about why we should have a publicly owned railway. I did stuff on buses. But my kind of specialism really was the shipping industry, and I was involved in a lot of campaigning on trying to regulate the condition of seafarers who were employed around the UK coast, where we were under threat, and basically, and it's still the case now, where there are lots of shipping companies that bring in lower cost foreign labour. So many British seafarers who were employed, of course, lost their jobs. So there were exemptions on the Race Relations Act and on the national minimum wage, which we fought, and we tried to do something about that and raise the profile very much of those issues, and did get some eventual change on the national minimum wage, although it didn't have a massive impact. And we also lobbied the Scottish Parliament about Caledonia Brain, which was the publicly owned ferry company that delivered lifeline ferry services to the islands over in the Western Isles in Scotland. And we did a number of things. So my job almost evolved into more of a campaigning kind of one rather than a research and policy one, because of the nature of Bob's leadership, and I was really pleased to do that. And the one thing I can say about Bob also is that he was very good in the sense of letting you, and showing a lot of faith in you as a person who said, right, I've got an idea, I want to do this, why don't we think about lobbying, having a briefing with these MPs, then sending a letter to the minister, doing this, doing that. And he was a person that just said, yep, that all sounds good to me, just keep me informed, get on with it. So he showed a lot of faith in his staff. Before, under Jimmy, it was quite difficult, this wasn't Jimmy's fault, but it was quite difficult to kind of promote new ideas and to think of different ways of doing things, because the union had done things in a certain way for so long, it just kind of continued, and there were lots of people who had their own fixed ways and their own relationships which they wanted to carry on with, whilst Bob was open to anybody going to see him to say, right, let's think about doing something different, let's do this. And as long as you kept him informed, you need to keep him informed, because he didn't like to find out through someone else, through maybe one of his officials or a member, that something was going on and he didn't know about it. So he always had to know about it. That was really important, that you kept him informed, you copied into him various emails you were sending. But you know, yeah, it was great to work for from that point of view. Now, of course, the RMT got expelled from the Labour Party because it, in my view, foolishly stood or backed candidates for the Scottish Socialist Party, and he, as a result of that, basically standing candidates against the Labour Party, we were expelled, although we continued to send the Labour Party our affiliation fees, but they wouldn't have that. But as a result of this, we ended up having a very good, parliamentary group, which Jeremy was a key member. John McDonnell was the convener, and we had a very good political officer called James Croy. And through the work of the MPs and James, we had a group of 25 or so at the time when I left. I think it's bigger now. Of MPs who took up RMT issues in Parliament. So the fact that we weren't affiliated with the Labour Party didn't matter. They still wanted to represent RMT members, quite rightly so. And we had some success, as I said, with some of the things that we raised with seafarers in terms of minimum standards, but also on a lot of issues on the railway, fire safety on the underground, where we got the government to back down on some proposals that would be very dangerous. And I think, although obviously other unions haven't followed the RMT model, because unions like the GMB and Unite are affiliated to the Labour Party, they are now far more critical about the candidates who they actually support and are going to give funding to. And quite rightly as well, in my view, because before we would have a situation where Unite might have 100 MPs, and some of them were doing very, very little at all in terms of taking up trade union issues. So, other unions have adopted a far more sceptical position in terms of who they're going to support in terms of Labour MPs or Labour candidates. Bob was very demanding also in terms of other organisations we dealt with, like the TUC and the ITF, but also amongst his own officials, and he would expect them, to be put in 100% in, quite rightly so. He was not afraid of a dispute, as we know, and he would always seek to, if it meant have a strike ballot or even a strike to get the best deal, then Bob would do that. But he didn't it wasn't confrontation for the sake of it. Always the number one thing for Bob was to get the best possible deal for RMT members. He had no fear. He wasn't worried about cozying up to Labour ministers or shadow ministers or other union general secretaries. He didn't carry favour with people. He was not afraid at all of going against the grain and being very robust. And I think the trade union movement needs all kinds of people right across the spectrum, of people who are willing to say, let's do things differently. And Bob did, and brought real vigour to the union movement from that point of view. It was a very good pressure point within the TUC. A couple of other little things I'll just mention that he did. I mean, things like the Cuba Garden Party, which we used to have every summer, became a bit of an institution in the trade union world in the summer, when Bob had his Hawaiian hat. Bob used to love World Cups where England were playing, because he would come in his England shirt. He would say to staff, he's very good about staff morale in terms of Christmas parties and staff outings, and from that point of view. So morale went up a lot when Bob was General Secretary. And during the World Cup, Bob used to delight, because one of his friends in there who worked there was this guy called Alex, who was from Scotland, very keen in this football. And Bob would say, if a game was kicking off in the afternoon, England playing the World Cup, all the staff could have the time off and go and watch the game. But apart from Alex, who had to actually stay and work in Scotland, and they hadn't qualified. But overall, he just gave everything really, to the union. I mean, if somebody, a branch secretary from Glasgow, would write in and say there was a member who was going to get his 40-year membership badge, could Bob come and present it to him? Bob would do his best to get there if he could, if he didn't have another engagement. and it just gave massive commitment. And obviously, in terms of paying conditions, he really did a lot to increase paying conditions. There's a lot of stuff and a lot of scandalous stuff in there, terrible stuff in the Standard about London Transport, London Underground drivers. But what was not reported a lot was all the campaigns that fought for lower paid workers. And through the strength of our members in London Underground, for example, we were able to win the living wage for cleaners on London Underground, who up to that point were treated absolutely terribly by the management and had terrible conditions. So I think kind of members right throughout the union benefited from Bob's influence. And so obviously, Bob dying at 52 is it's a terrible tragedy, and I think his the union, the RMT, is left in a bit of a state of shock. Obviously, I still talk to people over there because I worked there for many years. So and really were kind of really in a position of what do we do now? Now Bob's not here. It was impossible to imagine the RMT without Bob because of his stature and influence within the union, and also increasingly outside the amounts of people that had come across Bob and the various meetings and things that he'd done up and down the country. So it's impossible you feel to fill the void. I think I was talking to someone else the other day, and we were talking about success, and I was saying it's almost like replacing Alex Ferguson as boss of Man United. It's almost like you can't replace Bob, it's because he was such a good union leader. So I suppose in conclusion, I would say that my memories of working for him were very good, and obviously RMT is forever going to be better off due to his influence. Thanks very much.
Thanks.